Former Public Protector Advocate, or Professor rather, Thuli Madonsela is expected to testify before the Section 194 Parliamentary Inquiry into the fitness to hold office of Advocate Busisiwe Mkhwebane. Madonsela is among a list of 5 names that Mkhwebane submitted to the committee to request that they be forced to testify before the inquiry. But for more on this story, let's bring in SABC News reporter Bulelani Phillip. Bulelani, a good morning to you. I think this is certainly one of the more anticipated testimonies before the inquiry. Let's talk a little bit about why this is particularly significant in your view.
Well, good morning to you, Naledi, and to the viewers at home. Essentially, there are at least 3 parts that the legal team of the suspended public protector want to pursue with the former public protector, Professor Thuli Madonsela. One is the report on the CX matter, which began under the tenure of Madonsela, but it was never completed, and it was later completed when Advocate Mkhwebane took office. Now, the legal team of the public protector wants to actually poke holes around why that particular investigation took long under Madonsela, who had previously argued that she had a lack or limited resources to pursue that investigation. But when Advocate Mkhwebane took over, that investigation was eventually completed. So Advocate Dalimpof will be pursuing to juxtapose how under Mkhwebane she was able to complete such a complex investigations as compared to her predecessor. The second investigation that Advocate Dalimpof is expected to actually pursue is the issue of the Free and Dairy Farm report. Again, that report began under the tenure of Advocate or Professor Thuli Madonsela. It was never completed. There were some preliminary findings that were made, but she then left office, and therefore after that, Advocate Mkhwebane took over that investigation. Of course, we've had testimony around how some of those preliminary findings that were made by Madonsela were actually altered, and eventually in the end, they were actually in conflict, or rather were contradictory to the previous report that was drafted by Advocate Mkhwebane. So again, those contradictions will be pursued by the legal team of the suspended public protector. The third aspect, Naledi, is the issue of the costs overrun, or rather the exponential growth in the legal costs of the public protector under Advocate Mkhwebane compared to her predecessor. Now, previously, Advocate Dalimpofu had argued that the costs had actually increased because of the number of cases that Advocate Mkhwebane was undertaking compared to her predecessor. But on the other hand, the evidence that has been led by some of the witnesses seems to suggest that the legal costs had actually increased because of the reckless litigation by Advocate Mkhwebane, particularly on some of the high-profile cases that were actually taken to court and eventually set aside. Naledi?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's been quite a bit of contestation from Professor Madonsela saying that it's not necessary for her to appear before the inquiry. And I quote in one of the letters in her response letter, "I do not see the rationale connection of the majority of the above questions and the Section 194 inquiry, which stems from judgments by courts up to the Constitutional Court regarding Advocate Mkhwebane's integrity, flowing from court decisions about her honesty and professional competence." And it goes further. And that's an interesting point that she raises there, right? What is it that the testimony of Professor Thuli Madonsela can do for the process, particularly for Advocate Mkhwebane, and whether or not she is fit to hold office?
Well, at the moment, I can put it perhaps maybe in this fashion, that there are puzzles on the table, and the legal team of the public protector is trying to piece together this puzzle that they want to argue in the end when they make these closing deliberations and inputs. And therefore, they feel that some of the experiences that happened under Professor Thuli Madonsela could be used to actually compare her performance compared to that of Advocate Mkhwebane, particularly in relation to what the legal team of the suspended public protector says is that the capacity as well as the number of cases that were completed under Mkhwebane were actually far higher compared to that of Professor Thuli Madonsela. Again, as you've quoted in that letter that was written by Advocate Professor Thuli Madonsela, Madonsela rather, is that she didn't feel initially that she is actually going to add any value to the work of the committee that is investigating the fitness to hold office by Advocate Mkhwebane. However, the legal team of the suspended public protector has actually insisted that they want her to come to a point where they asked the committee to actually subpoena her to come. The committee felt that it was actually necessary for the former public protector to come and testify, particularly because they also have questions in relation to the CX report. So that's why they actually ended up in the end agreeing that the usefulness of Professor Madonsela is actually quite valid in this inquiry, and they actually want to see her expertise being actually aired in this inquiry so that they can also be able to not have loopholes or open spaces that they cannot fill because the advocate, Professor Madonsela, has actually not come to assist the committee. Of course, what did emerge yesterday was that the affidavit that she submitted to the inquiry was actually submitted on Saturday. And the legal team of the Advocate Mkhwebane had complained that they actually wanted to reschedule her at a later date because they actually wanted to go through that affidavit because they were saying that they didn't have sufficient time to prepare her in order for her to be led through the evidence. So, however, that request by the legal team of the suspended public protector was actually turned down, and the committee resolved last night that she must actually be appearing today and tomorrow. But again, if history is anything to go by, I would not be surprised if Advocate Dalempofu actually presses on with his request and argues orally today for the Professor Madonsela to be rescheduled to appear at a later date in order for them to have sufficient time to prepare.
I'm chuckling at how you're tripping over the advocate and the professor. I think we're all doing that, and we certainly will be doing it as well as we watch that testimony. She's part of a list of names that have been submitted by Mkhwebane's legal team. Who else is on that list?
Well, I keep making that mistake. Professor Madonsela has been the person that has actually been summoned already, but it came across again yesterday that the legal team has made a renewed call to the committee to call, amongst other people, the leader of the BOSA, Mr. Mmusi Maimane, because they also want him to come and testify in relation to the CR17 and BOSASA matter. And there were also two other advocates that were on that wish list of the suspended public protector. Again, the suspended public protector's legal team has made renewed calls, even though these have been turned down twice before. That is now calling President Cyril Ramaphosa, as well as Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan, as well as DAMP Natasha Matsoni. But the committee still feels strongly that the evidence of that trio would not add any value, and therefore they had felt, at least by last night, that those names would not be considered as witnesses that would come before this committee. The last batch of people that the suspended public protector's legal team also want to be recalled to come and finish off what they deem as unfinished testimony is former Deputy SARS Commissioner Ivan Pillay, who is in the Netherlands and who had indicated earlier that he was unable to assist the committee further. The second one is former SARS executive Mr. Johan van Lochrenbeck, who had also felt that all the outstanding questions that were lingering or were outstanding, they were dealt with through an affidavit. And the last person is the former COO in the Office of the Public Protector, Ms. Pasani Baloyi, who had also felt that she had actually assisted the committee as far as she could. So those batch of witnesses, the committee again felt by last night that they would not be necessarily be recalled as requested by Advocate Dalempofu and the suspended public protector.
I know you're looking at so many details, and I'm sorry, I'm going to try and get more out of you, because you've also had the testimony of the public protector investigator who was in charge of investigating the so-called rogue unit at SARS, the South African Revenue Service. Bianca Mvuyana having testified. What did we hear from that testimony?
Well, a lot of evidence seems to be, as I say, forming part of this puzzle that the legal team of the public protector wants to put together. Sometimes it's very difficult to actually get to the nub of what they are trying to achieve. But in the main, from what we heard from her yesterday was that she made a concession under, evidence leaders that she did feel that there were some aspects of that investigation of the SARS intelligence unit that had been overlooked through her investigation, and she made that concession, which is quite a significant thing. But under re-examination, which again would be somewhat a little bit different, she said that had she been in the same situation, faced with the same evidence, she would actually come to the same conclusion that she came to at the time of finalizing that report. But the overriding issue here, Naledi, is that that report had been set aside by the highest court in the land, the Constitutional Court. So in terms of reinvestigating that particular investigation, which has actually been dealt with by the Constitutional Court, I would not understand the relevance of that information, given that that matter now is seen as a matter that is settled.
Yeah, well, let's get into the big story for today. Lastly, before I let you go, Bulelani, Professor Thuli Madonsela to appear before the 194 inquiry. When do things get started today?
Well, the committee is due to begin sitting at 10 o'clock this morning. And as I've said before, if history is anything to go by, I would expect that before even Professor Madonsela testify, Advocate Dalembofu would probably seek the audience of the committee to actually repeat what he's written to the committee to request that they want to reschedule her, because they want to actually have sufficient time to actually peruse her affidavit so that they've, are prepared to actually be leading her into evidence. Because essentially, they are the one who have called her here, and they are the one who will be beginning that leading that testimony by Professor Madonsela.
Right. So we may or may not see her take the stand today, but we'll be watching closely, and we trust you to keep us updated. Bulelani, thank you so much for that. SABC News reporter there, Bulelani Phillip, speaking to us.